it was a very dark time for me. The year after I did that record, I went completely broke the year after making that record. There was an aggressive campaign on the part of Geffen Records to discredit me or embarrass me or try to cause me harm, which was effective in that I lost a lot of business in the intervening year or so. But I don't personalize that toward the band. I feel like the band were the one party in all of this who were not taking shots at me, you know?
Yeah.
They were very circumspect when they were talking about the process of making the record in interviews and stuff. Like they didn't want to ruffle any feathers. And so they didn't personalize their complaints very much. I'm gratified by the fact that they didn't scapegoat me to the extent, you know, that their record label and their management did. It was a surreal experience to have this big corporation have invested a lot of money and their sort of publicity capital in a record by the biggest band in the world, and have those very selfsame people shit talking me to music journalists and other people in the music business and actively trying to cause me harm. That was a very surreal experience for them to be shitting on this record that was obviously very important to them. From a business standpoint, it was going to be a huge record. And I just didn't get why they were shitting on the record. And then as a secondary effect, shitting on me. I just didn't get it. And it was an unpleasant period for me. The year after making that record, I saw a big drop off in my normal clientele. Like the smaller bands that I was working with, the independent bands, a lot of them were suspicious of me now because I'd worked on this big hit record, and that made them suspicious of me and my motives. Like, there was a kind of a normal career trajectory where somebody would start out in the underground and they would start to get noticed, and then they would become sort of a mainstream player and then unavailable to anybody who wasn't a big name.
Yeah.
Something similar to that had happened with Butch Vig, like who was a hero in the underground and the punk scene. Then his name was associated with Nirvana, and suddenly none of the bands that were his bread and butter in the years prior, none of them could get him to answer a phone call. And that's just a result of him moving into a sort of a professional tier where those bands didn't have access, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a suspicion of me that was sort of expected to happen with me, that I would now be unavailable to all of my normal clientele. So that normal clientele disappeared or dropped off dramatically. And then the sort of mainstream or major label artists were being actively discouraged from working with me. And I know this because I have friends who were in the process of making records in the year or two after that, who were told explicitly by their handlers that they were not allowed to work with me. They could work with basically anybody else. They just weren't allowed to work with me. It was a boys' club. It was a closed circle in the mainstream music business, and I represented a way of working that would negate that network. And so I'm not surprised at all that people were discouraged from working with me.
But I can imagine that there must have been other individuals who were also very much in line with the punk ethos. Why were they so intimidated by you in particular?
I don't know that people were intimidated by me. I think that people saw me as a liability. Like if you're involved with a big record label and your relationship with them is somewhat fragile, meaning that they could wreck you, they could ruin your career, you would not want to antagonize those people by working with someone that they saw as an obstacle, or that they saw as someone that they saw as an impediment to them going through their normal modes of behavior. then if you were a small band and you aspired to being picked up by one of these big record labels, and it was made clear to you that I was a pariah in that world, you also wouldn't want to associate yourself with me, because you wouldn't want to be tarred with this brush of, oh, they're a defiant indie band, and they,
yeah,
they would close some doors on themselves if they did that. So I basically had to rebuild my clientele from the deep underground network, from the peer group of people who were not part of that aspirational world. And I had, existing clients, people that I had worked with for years that stuck with me, but I had to rebuild my new clientele from the ground up, basically.
Jeez.
I'll never forget the moment. There was a moment, maybe 6 months or so after the release of that record, where I did the books on the studio, and I paid all the utilities, and I paid the salaries for the other employees, and I paid the insurance, and I paid everything, and I had 50 cents in the bank. Like, my bank balance after paying all my bills and doing payroll and the mortgage and everything, my bank balance was 50 cents. And that was, unusual for me at the time, because I had been working very steadily and I had built up a bit of a cushion, which allowed me to survive that fallow period. The band made the record on their own terms.
When did you first realize that this was happening, that this was starting to develop these problems?
Well, the first inkling was when the band called me and said, yeah, the record label and the management hate the record. They want us to redo it all. And I was like, yeah, I kind of saw that one coming. I mean, I think the trajectory of that record, that is them going off to make the record on their own, the record label stamping their feet about it and trying to get them to change it, them ultimately making some changes, the record coming out in a way that was less than satisfying for me, given that their record label and their management tried to scapegoat me like pretty aggressively prior to the release. Like, all of that whole trajectory, I think that was kind of preordained. I don't think there's any way they could have gotten out of that record without something like that happening. Whoever their engineer was, something on that spectrum was going to happen. Some combination of those events was going to happen. Given that it did, I feel like they navigated it about as well as anybody could. For my part, I might have been, I was more of a prick then. I was more like willing to irritate people. And so I think I was probably a little coarser about my reaction to all of those things than was necessary. And I'd like to think that I wouldn't behave that way now.